do the intro?
We don't even have an intro yet, but here we are. This is the intro. Or do you have an intro?
I don't have an intro.
Okay.
It's
well,
like the,
you're
welcome
supposed
to
to do
death. Welcome to Discourse or Death, the podcast where we do the discourse so we can avoid the death.
That is precisely it.
Yeah.
So, I'm Steven. That's Daniel. We wanted to bring together a podcast where we're trying to bridge the gap. So we called it Discourse or Death because we have these really, really good conversations and we cover a myriad of topics. And we finally thought to ourselves, you know, there's a lot of podcasts out there that are actually less interesting than our conversations. And that's not to put us on a pedestal or anything, but just to say that, you know, maybe other people kind of might feel what we're putting down. So we call it Discourse or Death because we just feel like there's this great divide in America right now where people can't talk about ideas freely and without getting, you know, really bent out of shape over it or without fighting each other. And we kind of come at things from different angles and in different ways. And we've always peaceably agreed or disagreed and be able to hash things out. And I've learned a lot from him. He's probably learned nothing from me. So, so that's kind of the idea. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think we also try to find primary sources on things that as you listen to us, you'll find that we're more conspiratorial than average, I guess. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, but you know, there is plenty of fake news out there as well. You know, so not on top of having these conversations and trying to bridge the gap on things, you also try to, you know, make sure that we're agreeing on like the same set of facts, right? Like we got to make sure that we're all grounded in the same reality, and then we can have differing opinions on like, okay, well, what do we do about this reality? Well, we have to agree on what's actually going on in the world, and you know, so that's also another thing. Like, there's lots of fake news on both sides, lots of agenda-driven stuff. So you know, we want to make sure we find primary sources. You know, find out what's going on, like straight from the horse's mouth, no spin, and we can go from there.
Right. I'm glad you brought up that fact, because that's one of the problems we have in our country and maybe the rest of the world right now, is that we're using these very specific terms for things. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times we're shooting past each other because we're using the terminology that the media oftentimes is giving us or pushing down our throats. And that means one thing, whereas it implies a lot at the same time, right? So it makes it difficult to have real conversations because you're using these, I'm going to say triggering, use these triggering terms where you might not mean it that way, or you might not even really know what it means, right? Mm-hmm. You've just heard it spouted out enough times, and you're going to regurgitate, you know, whatever media you are consuming at that point.
Yeah. Yep.
So, what is it that you do?
What is it that I do? Well, I am in IT. I was in the military. I served in the Navy for 9.5 years, so I've been exposed to myriad different people, life paths, etc. You know, so I like to think that I've been exposed to enough other ideas that I don't think that my way is necessarily the right way all the time. You know, that's one thing in the military, is like you have to hear lots of other people's perspectives, and you're ordered to literally give it the time of day. You know, you can't just shut things down. And yeah, I do the IT things now, general knock technician bullshit, nothing terribly exciting. And yeah, that's professional. And I do a little bit of music, I guess.
The guitar throne room there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. What about yourself?
So yeah, consider myself an entrepreneur. I'm really just a business owner. I work for myself. I run a small personal training company, and I enjoy doing that. It's been good, and I feel good about it. This last year has obviously been god awful on the fitness industry as a whole,
Right.
but we're making it happen.
Yeah,
life is
trying our best.
pretty good overall. So that's where we're at, and you're branching out into that too, right, Mr.
Yeah, trying to do the whole real estate magnate thing, I guess. Which is ironic because I'm super anti-capitalism, man, or whatever. But you got to work within the system, change it, right?
Yep. And it's brave, honestly, I think, because even if I move things around here and said, okay, I generate some capital and I want to buy some real estate, I don't know if I would do that right now. Like with all the rent, cessation that we've seen over the last year because of the I want to find a funny word for it, but the coof, because of the coof.
Yeah.
I mean, how are these landlords really supposed to make it? Because the government's made it okay for people not to pay the rent, and I get why, right? Like,
yeah.
That's one thing, but so all that to say, I don't think I would want to get into that game. So you're a brave man. Has that worked out okay for you so far?
Well, I'm lucky in the sense that like what properties I am trying to get, I'll own outright, so I'm not going to have a mortgage attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just be mine, So if there's not a renter, I'm not going to be totally asked out. And once I get this house here in Seattle rented out, that the rental market in Seattle is just wildly different from what it is in Indiana. So I don't think I'll be suffering so much here, but we'll see. Like so far, the one rental I do have in Indiana has been fine. I'm sure there's been some government assistance there, but it's just getting paid, so I have no complaints.
Nice.
But yeah, it's man, I'm not sure. I don't really have too much to say on that, man. Like these corporations who are buying up all these properties, fuck those guys. But like the smaller landlords, the people who might have like 2 or 3 places, all have mortgages attached to them, and if one renter misses something, that could potentially screw up everything. Yeah, there needs to be some kind of assistance there. I don't think that's unreasonable. But also we have like all these corporations and foreign investors who are buying up property everywhere. Fuck those guys. I have no sympathy for them.
Yeah. And they're oftentimes going to be so over leveraged, which is part of the reason why they've been able to grow so much. So here soon, we'll probably see a shrinkage of their position because they're going to be so over leveraged that they're eventually not going to be able to pay for all that, like without people actually paying for their rentals. Because you're talking about corporations that don't necessarily always own the property, like outright.
Right.
They're still paying on it too. It's gonna be weird.
Yep. Yeah. We'll see who gets bailed out. We'll see if it's going to be a repeat of 08 where these banks can basically offload everything, get bailed out by the government, rebuy those houses again at like half the price, and then the cycle repeats itself while millions of people like have to foreclose and are asked out. If they want to storm the Capitol, if that happens again, I'll be right there next to them, man. Yeah.
I heard today that they're gonna like start up some kind of big investigation on everybody that stormed the Capitol. I'm gonna use finger quotes here, storm the Capitol.
Right.
Because I don't know, we've talked about that before, but I just think it's so it's just so stupid. Like the only person that really like got killed wasn't she a Navy veteran that was there?
She was an Air Force vet, I think.
Air Force vet.
I mean,
yeah.
Oh, let me fact check that real quick.
You're probably
I'm
right,
pretty sure.
but so the one that dies, it's not like they killed a bunch of senators or whatever, which
Yeah.
would be certainly crazy, but no, one of the protesters gets shot, and nobody
Yep.
cares. Right? Nobody cares about that. That's fine.
Well, I wouldn't say no one cares about it, but
Well,
I
you
don't
know
know
what
what.
I mean. When I say that, I usually mean just like it gets no media coverage, and most people don't know about it. So that's my nobody cares.
Well, you can't say there's no media coverage because there was extensive media coverage.
No, I mean
her.
about her getting killed specifically.
Well,
Yeah, not like the event. Like the event's been all over the place.
Oh, I mean, yeah, but I would say even her being killed, like everyone is saying, like, oh, 5 people died. All of this is pinned on Trump or whatever. Like, I don't think it's accurate to say that there's no coverage, even on her death specifically. You can say like, oh, people were spinning it that she was like a domestic terrorist or whatever, but it was definitely being covered. It was definitely being covered. It wasn't covered as an act of police brutality, if that's what you're saying. But to say it was not covered at all,
Okay.
I'm not sure about that.
I'll give you that. But yeah, it's like, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like it needs to be covered as an act of police brutality. Like what the
I don't think that's unreasonable, but you also have to. Oh man, you gotta look at it like what was it? What's going down? He was a police officer, but I know as someone in the Navy, we're trained to use deadly force if it looks like shit's about to go down. So yeah, we don't know if they're armed or not. Like think about it at this guy's perspective. He didn't know if she was armed. She wasn't. I think it was pretty obvious looking like behind her, but given the information that guy had, I mean, I guess, and I'm just gonna like full transparency, I think that particular shooting was justified. Just given like, well, what would I have done as a veteran, or if I was on top side and I see all these people who are like climbing over barricades and whatnot, breaking windows, and I have to defend like people, like, yeah, that's dicey. You don't know what their intent is, and if at the end of the day that one shooting can potentially deter everyone else from trying to continue climbing over, which it did, that these are the kinds of calls that you got to make in that moment. So like there's not I don't think there's a clear-cut case for police brutality in this one.
I'm surprised to hear you say that. I thought anyone would be talking about police brutality in that case. It would be you.
No, not this time. Not this time. And I'm sorry to disappoint you there, but I had to think about this one from what was that cop seeing? It's different from where there are cases where someone is fleeing. There's no intention there. I'll even say there are cases if there's someone like has a phone, but at a distance you don't know that's a phone. It could be a gun. You don't know what their intent is there. I say even that's a gray area. But in this case, when you have like a horde of people who are breaking down windows, like trying to break in and like climb over your barricade when you are paid to protect the people and you don't know what they want to do. Yeah, if he didn't take the shot, who knows what could have happened? They would have broken down the barricade, and then what?
Well, they were all in the Capitol anyway.
Yeah, but they weren't actually where the senators were, or where the whatever lawmakers or whatever. That was the last line, to my understanding. Like if they got through there and they got through that cop and he just kind of said, "All right, you guys do what you do," we really don't know what would have happened. So I think ultimately that shooting de-escalated the situation from where it could have went. I mean, we don't know. Maybe they would have went in there and just went all gone kumbaya and maybe turned some desks over. But there's also plenty of footage of them saying, "Oh, hang Mike Pence." How much of that was hyperbolic? We don't know. How much of that was like, "Oh well, if the chance was if the opportunity presented themselves, would they actually fucking strung that man up?"
Doubtful. I mean, I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying, but I just kind of doubt it based upon the fact that like when the crowd finally does get in there,
they just kind of milled about.
They just kind of mill around.
Like, yeah.
You've seen all the videos, right, where they're like walking through.
So we have that information, so we have all the countless cell phone takes, and we just say they get in there and they just kind of smear shit on walls and just like, "Oh, hey, we did it, guys," and there's like obviously no real plan. But that guy, in his situation, when he just sees a mob of people trying to break through a barricade that you are supposed to defend with deadly force if necessary, I mean, I don't see a lot of options in that specific case, just given the information that man had. He's one guy versus how many people on the other side of that door. You think he can't know?
You only get in here to walk around the rotunda and do nothing.
Yeah, and I'm sure if they're saying like, "Hey, we're gonna get in there, but we're just gonna walk around in circles because you don't actually have any plan or
you ain't getting in here to walk around in circles."
Yeah, but there's impossible for them.
You ain't taking those selfies on the Speaker of the House desk. That's not gonna happen.
Because at the end of the day, that is the extent of what happened. Okay, I guess some laptops got stolen, but yeah, they just walked around and fucking took pictures like tourists. So yeah, and we all saw that once they actually got in there. But that cop did not have that information. He did not have access to the countless phone videos and shit that we can all analyze afterwards.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry to disappoint you there, but that I'm not calling for that cop's head.
Dang. So I'm all distracted over here. There's like this group of 3 squirrels out in my yard playing, and they're like, I don't know, it's just weird. They're just like, I don't know if they're just playing or they're trying to have some kind of 3-way thing or what it is. They're very goofy. So what's been on your heart this week?
What has been on my heart this week? Oof, man. Well, it's so I followed the QAnon a bit, as you are aware. My mom kind of got sucked down to that whole thing. Yeah, and I see more and more, it kind of goes with the point of the podcast to begin with. Like I see more and more calls for leftists literally being killed. And I really need to know, do you see that level of, I don't even want to say vitriol, but just outright bloodlust from the left? Like really, I don't see it as much. And maybe I'm not looking for it, but I don't even need to see like, oh, some leftist said, hey, people do this. Like I go to like the Great Awakening forum or whatever, just looking for my own goddamn self. And, there's all kinds of rhetoric of like, oh, well, if all of us just killed 2 leftists, we would have no problems in this country, right? And, then I go to Reddit, super SJW far left Reddit or whatever, and I do not see that call to arms. Like I see lots of mocking, like, oh, these brain dead right wingers or whatever, but I don't see them calling for them to be killed. Or worse yet, them being the ones to empower themselves to like just go shoot a bunch of right wingers up.
Mm-hmm.
And I always want to say like, oh, there's crazy on both sides, but I have not seen it. And hopefully someone can say, like, oh, well, look at, here are these examples of crazy leftists saying like, oh, all conservatives should fucking die in a fire or something, or I will be the one pulling the trigger. But I haven't seen it, man. I guess that's, hey, yeah, it's to say, if we're gonna really what I've been thinking about, because I've always been of the opinion like both sides are corrupt, both sides are bad, blah 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 blah. But I can't say both sides are equal as much. Like maybe from a straight up like moneyed interest corruption, yeah. But when it comes down to like, okay, well, what solution? What are the issues and what are the solutions? Like, I see one side saying, oh, well, big government is the solution and we need to just tax everyone and blah 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 blah. And then I have another, and then I'm increasingly seeing the other side is kill all leftists. And I'm like, I don't know if that's like a very small minority or if that is becoming the more prevalent opinion on the quote unquote right, I guess.
And where are you viewing the let's kill all leftist stuff?
Well, like I said, it's generally on
the QAnon
these two specific, yes, this specifically like on Patriots.win and Great Awakening.win. Like those are like the two mainstream but not mainstream Reddit replacements, right? Like I'm not going to like Daily Stormer or things that are like just clearly Nazi shit, right? Like it's things that are fairly popular, and I think their fingers are fairly close to the pulse of, well, what is the quote unquote right hive mind thinking right now. So yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting you brought this up. So to be clear for the two people that are going to watch this,
yeah.
I am a right wing. I'm really not now, but I'm conservative. I have more conservative views. I am very much libertarian in mindset because I think the Republican Party is totally worthless, to be clear. And Daniel is more left wing. So
yeah, but I would never call myself a Democrat. Like, so yeah.
So just to understand like where this is kind of stemming from. But yeah, I've not looked into that much. Honestly, I don't even look at the QAnon crap anymore. Like it's such, because I think myself, like, and there's a lot of more conservative minded people that really wanted to believe in it, right? Like we really wanted that to be true. Like we wanted, if you look into the history of the Clintons, like, yeah, it's awful. There's some really shady stuff going on there. And somebody should probably be brought up on some charges and this will be investigated. And if Trump was going to be that white knight that comes through and saves the day, well, okay, that's fine. That sounds good as long as we can get all these criminals. And there's a lot of talk about pedophilia and like really dark stuff, which if you look into a bit anyway, it's hard to prove, as we discussed, and we differ in this a little bit as well. But I think that kind of stuff is really going on. I mean, it's been going on since the Middle Ages. That's how we get the myth of vampires to begin with at all. Okay, so vampires, they only come out at night. They live in these big castles and this kind of stuff. And you don't go around there because the vampire will get you. Well, it wasn't a damn vampire. These lords were like doing things with kids. And so if your kids were hanging out near the castle at night, whoever that serves the king would just snatch people up for his needs. Now, whether that would be, sexual or some kind of religious sacrifice thing, doesn't really matter. But
yeah.
So all that to say that this is not unprecedented in human history for the elite class, which is really the predator class, but for the predator class to prey upon kids in an awful way. And on top of that, even in a more like mainstream way, I mean, child sex trafficking in the United States has been through the roof for a long time now, and it's just now starting to be talked about. They just had that big bust. Did you see that? It was a week or two ago outside of Houston, this big bust. They got like 50 kids out of this house.
Really?
In sex trafficking. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So, you know, us conservative type people wanted to believe this Q because like, let's get these people freaking in prison or killed or whatever. Like, we don't want to stand for child sex trafficking.
Yeah.
But, you know, now that Trump has come and gone, like, it's obviously all nonsense. There's no truth to be had. Every timeline that got put on was then put off again and put off again. And, oh, just trust the plan. You got to trust the plan. Well, the plan never actually does anything. You just got to keep trusting the plan, and everything will be kumbaya at the end. But it never comes. And every time there's a date set, the last date. This is like the very last time I stopped paying attention. As in February, I got sent a video by my dad's wife, who's kind of a Q person, and there was March 6th. March 6th is the date. Like, you know, stuff is going down, blah blah blah. March 6th come and goes. What happens? Jack. So I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm totally done. I was mostly done before that, but then I'm like, all right, I'm not paying. So I don't pay any attention to this stuff. So they could be a bunch of, you know, racist people that want to kill some liberals. I don't know. I don't even care anymore. It's like, so outrageous. And in listening to people in the truth movement that have kind of had that same experience as I have, like, I don't know, it seems like anyone that's actually paying attention is not putting any stock into the Q stuff, you know?
Yeah. Well, so I 100% agree with you. Like, that's why I quoted also, like, Patriots.win is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, like, the Donald, used to be like the Donald Trump subreddit or whatever before it was banned for, you know, not
being woke.
For not being woke or whatever reasons.
Whatever.
Even though I wouldn't be surprised if there was like clear hate speech on there, just given what I see on Patriots.win. Before, I didn't do Reddit a lot, and by the time I did get into Reddit, the Donald was already banned, so I couldn't see for myself what was going on. But anyway, the Patriots.win isn't so much Q adjacent as it is just, well, it's increasingly looking like where the Republican Party is going, and conservatism in general. You know, it's kind of becoming like the cult of Trump. Trump speaks the truth all the time, which is clearly not accurate.
Clearly nonsense,
in my opinion.
Oh, totally nonsense. And not to interrupt you, but I've never been to the Patriots.win or Great Awakening.win, so I just pulled them up. But yeah, I mean, it's like Trump worship on the Patriots, like it's a giant eagle on one side. We should screen share. Let me screen share this because this is like, it's too good. It's too good.
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised that you've avoided it this long, man. Like I said, dude, like all of my talking points of like, oh shit, what is going on with the right, man? It comes from what they're saying. Like I don't need CNN or anyone to say, hey, oh, got these right-wing hate groups and they're so racist and blah blah blah. It's just like, I just see what they say to their goddamn selves, man.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, look.
So like, check it out. You got you know, the bald eagle. You got the Donald.
Yeah.
Like we mean serious business, and like the seal, and then him looking all cheesy, which is always an interesting thing. I never thought about before until I've been, and I don't know if I won't go at length about this. This could be another podcast altogether. But how just like government ultimately is like an evil entity, and it'll always become one.
Yeah.
And in part of that argument, they were giving an example of how we deify the leaders, and I was like, well, we don't do that, you know. Well, we do. I was just always blind to it, right? Because we get brainwashed in school. And so the seal is like, oh, it even winks at you when you put the mouse over it. That's so good.
Yo.
I have
you know what? You gotta, that's attention to detail right there, though, man. That is
legit. I mean, I was hating on this website, and now I can't, because that is just too much. So anyway, So the presidential seal is a halo, and so that's been compared to to art, dating back to artwork of Christ, where and the Romans did it, and really about everybody's done it, where the leaders are deified with this big like halo thing. And I never thought about the fact that it's the same thing. It's just like our American version of it. Man, that wink is so good though.
And I think so. I think this is kind of a larger discussion. It's like, okay, what's happening to both parties, right? And you should. I don't care if you keep that up for the rest of the podcast. Honestly, well, maybe not. But anyway,
I'll just keep making him wink. It won't work.
Yeah. So we have if we're trying to put people in little boxes, or I guess really big boxes, so we have the party of the left, where it's like, okay, the government should be a net force for good, and everything that it does, it has everyone's best interest in mind in theory, which it fucking doesn't. And then now we're seeing conservatism and more the party of the right is just, okay, well, what does Trump want? And Trump is largely anti-immigration. Honestly, dude, Trump is just what makes people like me. Like, this has always been my problem with Trump. He's always taken literally every policy position, period, just depending on who's in the room with him, right? He has no core. Like, I've heard him say, oh, us rich people, we can pay more taxes. Because some people will be behind that. Like, taxing like the uber wealthy is like, it's a fairly popular thing, but obviously that's not what he stands for, and he's even like giving kind of token gestures to like the LGBTQ movement or whatever, and then he's like has all these anti-trans laws or whatever, and so he's just kind of found like, all right, well, what is it that I can say that makes the loudest people like me? And it's just been like a anti-immigration, like pro police, and low taxes, big business can do nothing wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, unless they're the tech companies, they're bad because they kick people off Twitter, but all other businesses can kind of just get a free pass, And so now we have everyone is they're able to project like the very worst, most base, most divisive ideas on him, so like whether it's becoming like, okay, it's just the persecution of the other is pretty much what Trump has become, was what he embodies, and it seems like that is what conservatism as a whole is going towards, and I'm not even necessarily trying to say like, oh, it's all about straight white males or whatever, but there's definitely that is a component.
White male.
That's a component, but then also like once you get to a certain income level, then it's just like, oh, okay, well, fuck poor people, because they want to raise my taxes to pay for roads that I'm not going to use, so I feel like it's so, yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, like we can talk about how straight white males are becoming the most persecuted class or whatever now. It's there's some truth to it, but I can't really get behind it. So we have
victim now.
Huh? What was that?
You can be the victim now. Sweet.
I mean, but that's what's happening. So that's what is happening. It's like, because there's the saying like, once you're used to living like, once you're used to like being kind of the supreme force or whatever, equality feels like oppression, right? So now we have all of these pushes for civil rights for everyone, like all different colors, different orientations, whatever. And because people have been getting kind of the short end of the stick for so long, and unique, and by and large those people are not straight white males. Now straight white males are being seen as kind of the enemy. And the problem now is, and this is going to be like some capitalist bullshit for me, is by and large most straight white males are not a part of the problem. Like sure, there's some privilege there, and they have benefited from things for a very, very long time. But we're getting to a point that well, the wealth gap for everyone is getting so huge. Most straight white males in this country are fucking broke, and struggling just like the rest of us. So maybe their ancestors might have been slave owners, but they're not fucking benefiting from that now. Somewhere that inheritance got lost to meth money or something.
Yeah, I mean, and that just goes back to our really our overarching conversation today, is just the fact that we're all being played against each other.
Yeah.
I mean, the left-right paradigm is a Hegelian dialectic that's been going on since medieval times. Okay, like the rulers always understood that the general population is not super smart, and even the ones that are, and we've talked about this, where even the ones that are, like, do you have the time out of your day to research all this stuff, to read up on this, to research on that, to like find what the truth is? Well, if you're a single parent, well, no, you definitely don't have time to do that. And most people don't even have the desire to do that. So it's easy to lead the crowds in directions that you want them to go, especially
which is against each other and against other poor people.
Which is against each other. I mean, and now with the technology that the way that it is, constantly being bombarded with messages and information nonstop, it's even easier to try to sway the thoughts of the masses. And so they don't care if you're a Republican, or they don't care if you're a Democrat, because now you're playing part of the game, And as long as we stay divided and we keep playing this game, well, being taken advantage of.
Yeah, I do want to elaborate on one part, because I'm going to lose some points here. Like I'm not going to be the one who says like white privilege doesn't exist, because like it does. Clearly the systemic racism is a thing. Blah 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 blah. But to say that all straight white men are inherently bad and evil, and I don't think we're trying to, but the messaging is pretty heavy-handed at this point.
Oh yeah, the messaging.
The messaging's pretty heavy-handed.
If you're a white person, you own slaves. It's like, what?
Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing, like Civil War. Most white people were not slave owners. Like they were conned by the rich white slave owners to say like, oh, just fight for us because maybe you can own slaves one day. I don't know, but that's neither here nor there. This is getting back to the like. So yes, we are obviously being divided by all kinds of different ways, but this is tying back into my first point is we need to bridge that gap, and we're gonna have to do some more research, but it's really hard to avoid that death when we're getting to a point. Call back to our podcast name, Discourse of Death. It's getting hard to think we can avoid death when we see one side of the political aisle like literally saying we're already too past that. We're already at a point where leftists need to be shot in the streets, and like they're because for generations people have been waiting for the coming race war, right? White people have been waiting for the chance to shoot us darkies in the street, and now it's gone from like, well, let's just kill black people or minorities or whatever to let's kill anyone who's on the left, and they're waiting for that opportunity, so it's like, well, how do we get past that to say like, hey guys, you need to be, if you want to take that, you need to be directing that towards like your Steve Mnuchin's or whatever, right? Like the people who are keeping us divided, because we're all struggling together. And it's like, well, how do we pierce that veil?
And the only way to do it, I think, is with a long form conversation like this, because this is the only way that we can be nuanced enough to talk about complicated subjects. So the media and both the parties keep everything so stupid simple, right? Everything is like only a talking point, very specific, only a soundbite, only a headline, very specific.
Yeah.
Well, again, most people are not diligent enough to actually like formulate an opinion. So they get these sound bites, they get the headlines, and they have very strong opinions that ultimately don't mean anything because they're being fed to them on both the
Yeah.
right side and the left.
Yeah, that makes me think, well, maybe we should spend some time like looking at these attention grabby headlines and try to break down like, okay, well, what's their real agenda here? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what actually happened and how are they spinning it? So they might post like something like, oh well, some black kid killed like some 10-year-olds. Like, oh, look at this thug killed some 10-year-old, blah blah blah. Like, all right, well, what else are these guys talking about? You know, is it like all race stuff to further radicalize people? You know, and the same thing as the other side, like, oh well, some police officer killed some black person. You know, well, what was really going on? Is it completely unjustified? I don't think every cop shooting is unjustified. You know, like what we're humans, we're emotional creatures, but you know, at some point we gotta really try to be as neutral about what actually happened, and then look at, okay, well, what is their bias and what is their agenda, because they're trying to make you fight for a certain side. All right. And right wing propaganda is amazing at it. You know, like they're really really good, and we can take some time to like look at like the formula that they have. But there's by and large like left wing propaganda is like, oh, eat the rich. But it's certainly not as racially and well, certainly not as racially motivated.
The left wing propaganda?
Not when in the it's with the exception of, well, yeah, that's not accurate.
Largely disagree with that. The left wing.
Yeah, that's actually that's not accurate. That's not accurate. I'm thinking of some examples.
Or even more racist, but the difference is simply like in this conservative rhetoric with these dumb QAnon stuff. Then yeah, you're talking about like traditional white against black racism. Where on the left you have like this new style of racism where like now whitey is the bad guy. Whitey has always held you down, and just the being white is like inherently evil, and there's no redemption for white people. So that's where like, there's no nuance. Like that is critical race theory. That is what kids are being taught in high school and college right now.
Oh, dude, okay, so here's a conversation. Critical race theory is just fucking United States history. It's not, you have to show me where it says, where in critical race theory white people are being taught to be ashamed of being white. Because as far as to my understanding, critical race theory is just like, all right, well, historically, these things happen, and this is now the results of shit that happened 200 years ago. There's a ripple effect, and now because of things that happened over the generations, we are now left with certain minorities in this state. And unfortunately, in the United States, the things that happened throughout however many hundreds of years was done by white people, just period. But that's not to say that you, Stephen, a white person, should feel guilty about that, because you weren't here 200 years ago, obviously. But we can't say that it didn't happen. So if you're saying that white people they're being taught to be ashamed for being white, that's obviously unacceptable. But that's not my understanding of what critical race theory is.
That's been my understanding as to what it is, because that's where it goes to. And then they also teach in critical race theory just like this overall hatred of America itself, right? Now, we've talked, obviously America's past is far from perfect. Its current state is far from perfect.
Yeah. So what is it?
Right. But
so is it teaching us to hate America, or is it to hate the fucked up shit that America has done? Like, we can't hate a country in itself, but we can hate aspects of its history. So
it's ultimately teaching to hate America itself, because you also have to understand that, back to our previous points with steering the masses, most people are not going to critically think out and differentiate the two. So if you have a bunch of kids, especially high school kids, that
Yeah,
fucked up shit, but you still love America. I mean, no,
I
don't
could.
even have them say like the Pledge of Allegiance in school anymore, and I
Yeah,
don't care about that. But it's just it seems to me telling is all.
I can see. I can see that being accurate. So if you're taught all these negative things about America just all the time without seeing like what good America has done in the world, I can see just kind of simplifying like, oh, okay, America bad.
Hmm.
But I don't. But like I said, that's just maybe we should look up what.
Yeah,
Let's find a primary source.
Yeah, we'll have to do a show.
What is critical race theory actually teaching? Because to my understanding, it's just like it's just American history. And America, historically, has had procedures and policies in place to benefit white folk. This is not a controversial statement,
right.
And so if we're kind of shining more of a light on that, and we're saying like, hey, because these things happen and these things kind of never stopped happening, and this is the result of that, that's not a bad thing to make people more aware of, because otherwise, like we got fucking, who was this one guy who was actually saying like, oh, slavery was good actually, when we have like elected officials who are, and let me look this guy up real quick. When we have elected officials who are actually parroting these points, like yeah, we need to combat that somehow in an institutional structural way. But yeah, this actually seeing what critical race theory is talking about is something we should look into for sure. Because when I hear it on the rise, like, oh, it's all bad and all doom and gloom and it's all white American hate. But to my understanding, it's just like, well, American history has been racist for a lot of the time. It just is what it is. Most white people now weren't the ones who implemented these policies, so they shouldn't feel guilty for it. They can acknowledge that maybe they might have benefited from it or their ancestors benefited from it, but feeling guilty about it isn't fucking helpful.
While you're looking that up, thought just left me. The critical race theory, it seems to want to like eventually lead into like some kind of reparations area as well. And again, this is like where it's like, okay, well, because you are white, now you've got to pay for XYZ because of slavery from way back in the day, which would be visiting the sins of the fathers onto their previous generations, which in a court of law, both in the Bible, but also in the court of law, like that's never been a thing. Like you can't hold your dad accountable for something that his grandfather did, right? That just has never been a thing. So I don't know, it just seems like it's a bad. And I think ultimately what it's doing is dividing America again, and just again going into another way to divide people, not only against each other racially, but against the country themselves. So what we had historically in America was we at least had the common bond of the idea of America, all right? Although it's been done imperfectly, obviously, right? And it's still being done imperfectly to this day. We had the idea that somebody could come here, somebody could, make a fair living or create a business or whatever and live reasonably free, right? And reasonably well.
Yeah.
That is the dream. And to do it amongst people groups from all over the world that come here. And now these kids are being taught that was all a lie, that was all bullcrap, and that can never happen unless we crush Whitey and bring up the past constantly. Like I get wanting to educate on like the evil of the past so that we don't.
Talking a lot. You're saying a lot of specific anti-white things. I need to see where they're saying like white people bad. I have to see that because I don't. White people are the majority of the country. You're not going to get away with saying, "Oh, we'll crush Whitey," and be taken seriously. You can't. That's just not going to happen.
Well, I think it's happening right now, but we'll dig into it. I'll have to.
We'll definitely have to dig into that one.
But my only other point, and then go with whatever you found, is people in this country, because people don't have any freaking perspective in this country. No one has traveled anywhere. Like your average college kid has gone nowhere, and they're the ones that are being all loud about this crap.
Right.
But I mean, if you look at the history of mankind, like this was not like an American only issue, right? Like we always want to act like, well, only we had slaves and the rest of the world was freaking beautiful and wonderful. It's like, no, we had slaves all over the planet, and they also varied in race. It wasn't like just black people that got locked up and turned into slaves. There were slaves almost every type of person in some degree or propensity at some place on the earth. Now,
so that's obviously you're right, but I largely think that is completely fucking irrelevant because I don't live in those countries. I live in America, so I don't care about the history of slavery in fucking Brazil or Jamaica or any. Well, maybe a little bit in Jamaica because I'm part Jamaican. But you know, we have all these. So yes, there's plenty of slavery in Africa, slavery in all across the world. But I don't live in those countries, so I don't fucking care.
But it still matters because even if you don't care, then you can't say, oh, well, America's the great Satan because they had slavery. It's like, no, the world then is the great Satan because we all screwed up and had this evil system of slavery, like everywhere.
Okay, but then what happened after slavery, right? Like, so everyone talks about America specifically because it didn't end at slavery. You know, it's slavery and then sharecropping, and then we talked about redlining a little bit, and then and there was the whole basically keeping blacks in the, at least in the South, as slaves by arresting them for like whatever bullshit charges. And they did that until like World War II, right? You know, there are lots of things that happen in America uniquely after slavery, which is why we don't talk about all those other countries. You know, like if you want to, so unless you want to talk about South Africa and fucking apartheid, right? But yeah, those kinds of, and I'll have to do some more research and find out. Okay, so who else had slavery, and then when slavery ended, what other rules still existed to keep those minorities down? Because maybe it's not as well documented around the world, but it is built into the history of this country, full stop, which is why we talk about it. And maybe we don't, and like I said, maybe we don't want to say we're the great Satan or blah, 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 because at the end of the day, it is what it is, you know? So we can't, so I don't think we need to say like, oh, well, white people today are all evil and bad because what happened 200 years ago, but what happened 200 years ago fucking happened. And then there's plenty of other things that happened afterwards. Maybe you directly were not responsible for it, but people today were impacted by it nonetheless. You know?
Yeah.
And to say, but yeah, I really need to see, I have to see what anti-white verbiage is in any critical race theory slide or.
We'll have a critical race theory episode.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think because maybe I have some misunderstanding about it, because you know, I'm just like, well, America was racist for a very long time, and we need to talk about it. If I think kind of getting to the anti-American thing, and I wish I circled back on that. If we need to balance out, like, okay, well, America did this good as well. I mean, we're not. I think we have to kind of accept to a certain degree that the era of American exceptionalism is over. As much as I hate to say that, as an American who, you know, served his country and is super proud of what he did, but you know, we did some dirt. We need to acknowledge that, and unless we acknowledge it, we'll never be able to move from it. We'll never be able to heal from it. We'll never. I think that's really been the problem. I think that critical race theory, we're shining that magnifying glass on it so hard in a way that we're not used to and we're not comfortable with, and we don't see all the time because, you know, now we have the internet, so we're fucking inundated with it, and it's uncomfortable, you know. But it needs, like when we talked about redlining and shit, this was just like a generation ago. Most people are not aware of that, you know, until everyone can acknowledge that this happened. We'll never be able to move on from it. So we got to this point where, you know, if we want to go to like however many hundreds of years ago, when the reparations was originally supposed to be a thing and everyone got their 40 acres and a mule or whatever, this was supposed to be our truth and reconciliation moment, like maybe 10% of slaves actually got that. And then they ultimately couldn't afford the land. They had to give that shit up, right? So that was supposed to be our opportunity to move on. Like, all right, we gave you guys a bad shake. Here, we're gonna try to compensate for you and make it better so we can all, be squared. That never happened. And so things have slowly been getting better and better and better, for sure. But until we actually do take a hard look and say, like, all of these things happen, and the result is where we are today, we'll never move from it, because we were always going to have someone saying like, oh, well, 1350, and white people and black people are just our lower IQ and blah 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 blah. There's no hope. There are reasons for all of this stuff. We need to talk about these things.
Yeah, and then I'm curious. So from your perspective, then what would be like your desired end game for that racial representation in America? And
end game.
I'll say this too, because like going back to your point on like the reparations that were done at that time, like, yeah, they did something. Yeah, it didn't work out very well. But then conversely, I mean, that's a hard thing to like try to fix, right? Like, when you like some of these family gets murdered and they're like, okay, well, your family's dead, but here's $10 million. Yay. It's like, well, you got $10 million, but it doesn't bring your family back. Like, it wouldn't make you, if you were slaves, like, well, you lived your whole life really, like worst way possible.
Yeah.
Doesn't make that okay. It doesn't make it go away that you got a bunch of land,
Yeah. Yep. Do you want my opinion on the reparations thing in general? I have one exception to the rule, and that's like cannabis, and we're going to get to that. But I largely think that reparations as a whole isn't possible. I do think too much time has passed, but I think we can allocate resources that would maybe disproportionately help Black people more. Like, because I largely think that it's 100% becoming a class issue at this point. Everyone says, like, well, not everyone says, but there's like the adage, all the terrible shit that's happening to Black people now is going to happen to the white man in like 20 years, right? Like when everyone was talking about like, oh, well, we have all these Black crack addicts or whatever, and welfare queens, blah 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 blah, and you go forward however many, like a generation or two, now we have like the opioid epidemic, and meth was just impacting a lot of white people, and white people make up more welfare recipients than anyone else, and largely that's just because there's more white people, but no one's talking about that, and so I think like now we're just at a point like we got to help poor people in general now, because Black people have been the poor people for a long time. That would help Black people disproportionately if we try to invest more in those areas, invest in infrastructure and invest in schools, et cetera, but we have to decouple that from race, because it'll never get any support. It's like, oh, if we have UBI, it has to be universal, otherwise it won't get any support. It's just going to be seen as welfare or socialism. But if we say like, okay, well, if we can take some resources, put it in communities where Black people do majority stay, but we have poor whites, poor whoever else, and they'll also see that benefit. I think that'll help get more support. And I also think it's very needed, because everyone needs that. Everyone needs access to like good schools. Everyone needs access to like clean water, whatever other infrastructure stuff can be thrown there. Or even it's just like, oh, well, we're going to fix all these roads and that's going to create a job program. It's going to be for this area. A lot of Black people will benefit it because a lot of Black people live there, but white people and anyone else who's in that area will benefit from it as well. I think that's how it needs to be thought of. I say that with the exception of cannabis, because now we have because once this is a systemic thing, generations of where Black people were adversely impacted by the drug war, full stop. That's not up for debate. That is not a controversial statement. And now we're going to have a whole bunch of white people, maybe a few other Black people as well, who are going to profit massively from it. I think that is an angle where we can do some reparations, and that if anything, it could also be kind of narrowed to the scope of people whose lives were literally fucking ruined for something that that is now going to be $1 billion industry. You know, they were just ahead of the game. They're the entrepreneurs or whatever, if you want to call it that. And their lives were absolutely ruined and their families destroyed. You know, everyone's talking about like, oh, well, we have too much single mothers in the Black households or whatever. Like, okay, well, how many fucking Black men were arrested between the 70s and the 90s because of bullshit drug charges that people are now about to fucking profit from? You know, I think that is a very small case of reparations that would, but once again, we can say the same. Okay, so there might have been some white people whose lives were also ruined on some bullshit drug charge, and they'll also be impacted. But, you know, I can say that by and large, it's not even a question, has impacted Black people more adversely than any other demographic in this country. Yeah. So that's my one thing that I can say, like, okay, that's a case for reparations that can help people today and now, and it can be funded with taxes on cannabis because now people are gonna make fucking billions of dollars on that shit. But reparations as a whole.
So it's really interesting. I've never heard anyone with that position.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but the idea of reparations always made me cringe because of my previous statements about like the sins of the father, right? But the drug war and the cannabis thing, I would go for that. That's a cool idea, I think, because and then you wouldn't make it like, well, the Black people get it. You just give it to everybody that was affected negatively by
it. Because not all Black people's lives were destroyed by marijuana, right?
Right.
So but it wasn't okay. Good on you.
Since, you know, Black men are the most imprisoned like population in the country, then it would disproportionately help them and their families more so than the other groups. It'd work itself out.
Yeah.
It'd be good. Because we gotta stop this drug war on nonsense. I mean, it's obviously not helping do anything.
Clearly.
It just you know, it keeps this whole police state prison industrial complex going. This gives the state a reason to lock you up, ultimately. And I'm not a drug user. I don't have a dog in the fight really, other than I want maximum freedom for people.
Absolutely.
So I don't care if you want to shoot up heroin in your house. I really don't. Now, is that good for you? Well, obviously no. It's a really stupid idea. But I think if you want to do it and you're not hurting anybody, you will freaking knock yourself out.
Yeah. Decriminalize drugs. Make drug treatment available. You know, that's because if people, I don't think anyone wants to grow up and be like, oh, I want to do fucking heroin all day. You know, like there's like a certain life path that you have to go down. And I think we need to make treatment like very widely available for people to eventually get off it. But to just have it like criminalized, like, oh, you do drugs and you just kind of stay in this cycle of a felony in jail and felony in jail and your life is effectively over. You know, that's not helping anyone.
Yeah, it doesn't help anybody. And really a lot of our treatment is all a waste of money. We waste so much money on all this crap constantly in this country. Everything we do, we throw a cajillion dollars at and it doesn't work. And I think people are going to wake up. So like, for example, our education system is something like 40th in the world, and we spend more money than anybody. The healthcare, same story. It's not the best in the world. Sorry to break it to everybody. It's not. And yet we outspend everybody by a huge margin.
Yeah.
It's so silly. And so this is another thing. I say this because my father-in-law is a psychologist, and one of my clients is a psychologist, and they'll be the first ones to tell me like, oh yeah, like their whole rehab system doesn't really work, and it needs to be overhauled and redone. And I don't know the details of that. I'm not an expert in those fields. They are.
All right, hey man, put that on list of things to talk about after critical race theory. Like, well, what is the rehab system in this country? Because other countries are making it work.
Do what?
Yeah, mental health. Because other countries are making shit with this work, right? Like if you like. States are making this work. Like I remember I was watching something because Seattle obviously has a huge drug and homeless problem. But we have a problem where we just put people in jail. They can't keep them in jail, so they just release them back on the streets, and they're just homeless and doing more drugs. And I want to say it's like Maryland or Maine. They actually had a very robust drug treatment problem so you went to jail, right? But you actually did have to see a therapist, and you did have to like get help, and you're even given certain drugs like help keep withdrawal effects at bay for a while. And yeah, it was actually a concerted effort to get people clean and helpful and productive members of society, which largely doesn't exist elsewhere in the country. So they might be throwing money that are at programs that are less effective, but I think it's important to figure out what works, and then like allocate resources to it, as opposed to just kind of throwing shit at a wall, I guess. And same thing can be said for education system.
Right, and that's what I mean. Like we just think, oh, if we can just throw more money at the problem, it'll go away. But we're just so inefficient, and everything is such a big bureaucracy now that a ton of money on the bureaucracy, and you're not really helping the people that need it.
Yeah, and I think that's large. I'm not gonna say largely anything. I think that's kind of a problem with the right versus left debate as well. It's like everyone's talking about like, well, we'll throw money or don't throw money at it, and no one's talking about like, well, what are actual solutions to these problems? So maybe some resources can be allocated to something, as opposed to like, oh, well, fuck you, got mine. When we talk about like the whole homeless problem, everyone was like, oh, if you want to just solve homelessness, just give everyone a house. Well, okay, well, did that work elsewhere? There are other countries that don't have the same level of homeless problems. Like, is it all drugs? They don't. What is it? I think, and this is just my opinion, living in Seattle, where the housing market is fucking stupid.
Right.
That there's a problem with zoning here, so we can't make affordable housing for people. But also maybe we just need to find the political will to build cheap housing somewhere, because I know this is kind of disjointed, because we have a problem where people will build cheap housing and just give homeless people housing somewhere, and then it'll be zoned out and it'll be torn out, and okay, well, now we got nothing again. It's like, okay, well, we didn't even really try to solve the problem. I don't want to say that was I don't want to say that was the solution, but we didn't even try to fix it. We're just like living with it, so we're not talking about like, okay, what ideas are there? The ideas are just like, let's send them all to Hawaii or ferry them to another state and make it some other state's problem. That's largely what I've seen, is like mass busing of homeless people to somewhere fucking else, and that ain't it.
Yeah, you're just shuffling chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Well, it's not.
Yeah.
It'll be less of a problem for your particular state, I guess, because you're moving people out of there. It's also a horrible thing to do. Yeah.
But like I said, we want to talk about more ideas to fix kind of these big problems, and get the idea, focus on the ideas, less on the ideology, I guess.
Ideas, not ideology.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, and that's we've talked about that. That's part of our heart for this podcast too. All two of you that are listening to this is like wanting to not only like complain about the problems from both of our sides, but to talk about potential
solutions.
Potential solutions to it. And so like the drug war thing, like you talked about a minute ago, I think is a good example of that. Reparations for victims of said drug war, and decriminalization of this stuff. And we've seen in other countries that have decriminalized, weed and cocaine and all this crap. After a few years of adoption, like the usage of these things goes down every time. You have this like for we as human beings have this forbidden fruit mentality, whereas if you say, well, you can't have that, you immediately say, oh, well, maybe I want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So if you just like demystify it, and then we could just educate the kids in the schools. Okay, well, this is an option, but these are the side effects of said thing. It's probably not that
Mhm.
smart to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it would help, but I could be wrong too. I don't know. But what we're
Well,
doing,
once again, you said it yourself, other countries have done this. They seem to be doing better than we are. Is it
at least,
perfect? No, nowhere is perfect. But
right? You're all there's a guy I follow on YouTube that his whole business is um, ultimately teaching multimillionaires how to expatriate and like why you would even do that. And
mhm,
one of the things he goes back to time and time again, I don't think we get really in this country because people haven't traveled anywhere, is that like
yeah,
America ain't the best at everything. Like and no country is the best at everything, right? Like
yeah,
it's a sliding scale of options. It's just like, well, what do you want? What do you want to deal with? Like,
mhm,
and we were just like, oh, it's everywhere else in the world is a total shithole, and it's just America. It's like,
yeah.
well, you obviously haven't actually gone anywhere then, because if you had, you wouldn't say that.
Hmm. And I don't know. Maybe that could be another good thing to talk about. It's like, okay, well, other countries are doing this. Here's why it works there. Maybe it's an idea that maybe you can try here. I don't think, like, people are people. We all want the same thing, and I don't think there are a lot of ideas that work outside of America that can't be implemented here to some degree, maybe except for guns. We are very unique when it comes to guns. But yeah, we just got to stop thinking we're yeah, like I said, the age of American exceptionalism is over. We can't think that we have all the answers to everything, and the American way is the only way.
Yeah,
Even if it comes down to like, even if it comes down to like other systems of government, I'm not even necessarily trying to say, oh, we got to all be socialists, but one of the biggest problems in this country is like the two-party system. Like, no one has options. Like, maybe we need to have like 5 or 6 or 7 fucking parties and like a whole parliament system, like in Great Britain or something. Because like this left-wing, right-wing monopoly effectively isn't getting us anywhere nowadays.
Yeah, and in fact, right now, I mean, it's sending us backward because we can't even talk about important things. It's just
Yeah.
whichever the red team or the blue team, whoever's in charge is going to start. And we've seen it increase dramatically. It really, since George W. and each president since him has gotten worse and worse with these executive orders. I mean,
Yeah.
George W. executive ordered the crap out of everything. Obama did more.
Yeah.
Trump did more. And now Biden's blown everybody out the water. He's like, hold my beer.
Well,
We've been executive order the crap out of everything.
That's also because there's no bipartisanship anymore. Like, so when George Bush is in office, Democrats might kowtow a little bit more, but he can't depend on them to get shit done. Doubly so with Obama, because we have how many Republican representatives say, like, my job is to make sure Obama can't do shit. So where does that leave Obama? I mean, where does it leave Obama? He's going to have to executive order, and that comes, but that's also part of the problem. Like, if we had not just one party who can stonewall everything, and we have like a mixture of different parties and ideas, like, oh, hey, I like this idea, I'll vote for it, and everyone's like, oh, I vote against it all the time because that's what the party says. Well, maybe we'll have fucking less executive orders being passed at this increasing rate, you know?
Yeah, and I agree with your desire for more political parties, because I think that'd be great for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side of the coin, one of the things that is great, I think, about our system of government is that, like, it's intentionally kind of hard to change things. Like,
Yeah.
with the checks and balances and the way that everything's set up, it's like the forefathers made it so, like, you shouldn't be able to just like have all these sweeping changes if you have a majority. Like, it's gonna still take a snail's pace to get anything done. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, and that can be good or bad, right? But a lot of time, in my opinion, I think it's actually good, because I'm of the viewpoint that government is ultimately not a good thing for most people.
Yeah. So and then I mean, this is ultimately just the ideology of progressive versus conservatism. The conservatism says like, oh well, we can kind of keep things and slowly change things, and I'm like, well, the status quo is not adequate for most of the country, and it's getting worse and worse for most of the country. So we can't make these incremental changes anymore.
Agreed. But that's not because of conservatism. Conservatism isn't like keeping us all down.
No. You're right. It's not necessarily because of conservatism. I mean, that's like the idea of like, okay, it's okay if we don't have these big sweeping changes all at once, right? Like that's kind of the conservative mindset is like change things, see how it works, maybe change something else 40 years later or whatever. Maybe I exaggerate, as opposed to like, well, we need to make all these changes right now because shit's fucked up now, and shit is fucked up now.
Oh, it is, and I think I understand where I might be confusing, because in American history, like we talked about a minute ago, I think the status for minorities has just gotten better, right? Like, it's not perfect by any means, but it's gotten better. Okay.
It has.
But I oftentimes, because I'm a white guy, I guess, I come from this perspective of the individual freedoms and capabilities of your average person, and what your average person has decreased over time because of more and more government interference and regulation. So, and we've talked about that before too, where, used to be, because, in the 60s, well, dad would work and mom would stay home with the kids, and you'd have a giant house and that'd be fine, right? Because the dollar went a lot further. Well, now that's all but impossible. I mean, you don't see that very much with people. You certainly do, but it's not the norm like it was.
But that's not. Do you think that is due to government regulation that made that happen?
Right, I do, because I think
you'll have to provide some examples, because in my opinion,
we'll have to make that another show, but yes.
Fine. Because I definitely see that regulatory burdens can be a problem sometimes, but I by and large think that regulations keep companies from doing dumb shit.
Right. And we've talked about that before. Right? I think that's just, at least for a while, we're gonna find
that's what it should be. But like, if we want to talk about, okay, well, why is everyone making less money? Well, that's just because corporations aren't incentivized to pay people more, and like the well-paying jobs that used to be here have all been outsourced. And no government regulation said, "Oh, hey, build everything in China." All the stuff that you guys used to build here, build that in China because it's cheaper. No government regulation motivated anyone to do that.
No government regulation specifically said that, but the policies led to that.
If you can show me the timeline of government regulation that incentivize these companies to offshore all of their labor as opposed to it just being cheaper, I'll be like, okay, you got me. But I
bring you around to a capitalist, man. You're already there. You're already like right there. We're gonna push you over the edge.
I don't know, man. I don't know if like I said, if you can prove
you're a successful capitalist, man. Like you're renting out houses, you're doing everything right. You must have read like Word or something, and now you got some properties. They don't teach us that in the school. They don't teach us that in brainwashing camp. I didn't learn freaking squat in school. One of the big things in school I remember, and it stuck with me, was Miss Starkey. Remember back in the day, everybody would get all bent out of shape about whatever, and she was like, not have it. And she was like, you're playing into it. It's about class and not race. So don't hate each other. And I was like, oh my God, like that really struck me at that point in time. And I don't know if it, hopefully it struck everybody else. I don't know, but, and our history teacher, what was his name? The black gentleman was in the top floor of
I can't
He was
remember.
awesome. He was pretty much, he was like super clued in too. He would get into stuff like
Oh,
that.
we went to high school together, everyone. Some background there.
All two of you that are still listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we could do it. We could do a show on the capitalism and why the government is killing it. Because ultimately, the goal, this is my opinion, and then we'll leave that at this for right now anyway, is in my opinion, the government, they're totally down with this UBI thing. Like UBI is not like this radical, like, oh, we got to talk the government into doing it. Like they're going to do it. Like it's going to happen. Why? Because the more so that they can keep everybody in the dole, it actually keeps people down, right? It's just like what we've seen from like the war on poverty, right? The war on poverty has been going on forever. But what's happened? People are more broke. It doesn't work.
Yep.
Okay. You have to give people opportunities to start businesses and to do well for themselves. You don't do that through all these government programs that actually have the inverse of their intended what they intend on paper anyway, or on the TV, but in reality, it's all done for control, right? You're going to do what they want you to do. You're going to be a good little citizen. And that's where this whole vaccine mandate is going to roll out. They're going to get everybody on UBI, and then they're going to say, oh, well, if you want your UBI, you got to take whatever new experimental vaccine we come up with next, because
we'll have to see. We'll have to see if that happens.
On it.
Like I know. Speaking like, all right, on the whole capitalism, dude, we're gonna have to read. Capitalism is gonna have to be a whole other thing, because
I know
we can't we can't just say like, oh well, if government regulation wasn't the thing, everyone would just start a business. That's what? No, especially now that
that's not true.
Yeah.
Sure.
Especially now where we're at the point where, okay, well, we had, man, like I said, like capitalism cannot work in its current state, you know? Like I said, or I haven't said it yet, but if we still had like hundreds of companies kind of competing against one another, and someone could actually just get an idea and start something, and that would happen more than like it's like a 1 in a million chance at this point. If someone's like, oh, I identified a problem and I can try to provide a good or a service, you know, and someone could actually do that, as opposed and not require billions of dollars to get the idea off the ground, as opposed to like, okay, well now if you want to, we had like the internet example for a second. I think you can't just start up an internet company, because you'll be competing against Comcast or CenturyLink and all these freaking giants, and these giants are in every space. Right, you can't just like make mom and pops like jam or something because you're competing against like Kellogg's or whoever makes Smuckers or whatever. So I think the idea that everyone can just like be a successful small business owner isn't realistic for most of this country's industries.
I don't necessarily disagree with you.
Yeah.
I think the reason why we got to this point, we obviously disagree with, but I don't disagree with that sentiment. I think you're totally right.
All right, and then to speak to the UBI thing, like companies are, it just goes with, once upon a time, man can work one job and save up and get a house and pay for everything, right? And now we have 30-year-olds like we all gotta like live in communes, right? Because it's too expensive to live, because companies aren't paying people enough to live. And that is not government regulation. That is just companies hoarding their wealth and not paying people enough money to live. And so what are we going to do about it? Well, the government solution is fucking UBI. So you can say like, oh, it's going to get everyone addicted and it's going to get everyone, because once upon a time, you have to think about it like this. Once upon a time, welfare was supposed to be for a few people who through whatever reasons couldn't make it. And we're getting to a point that everyone needs to be on welfare, because no one can fucking survive with the wages that are being issued to most people. You know, we have these millennials, like 20, 30-year-olds, like most people have to live with their parents again because they can't afford to live on their fucking own, and they have a full-time job, right? So we get to a point, we're at a point So it's like, all right, well, we either make the companies pay people enough so they can fucking live, or the government is going to, you know, open the teat. I don't know, but then everyone's arguing against freaking minimum wage. So like, well, what are we supposed to do? We can't mandate companies pay people enough to fucking survive, and we can't have UBI either. So what do we do? What's the idea?
Well, and that's what we're gonna have to work on. I mean, I think we could come to a consensus with enough discussion, right? I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah, of course.
But in my opinion, it's because of the over-regulation of the market. So, for example, I think that a minimum wage at all is a bad idea. Now, why would I say something crazy like that? Because by having a minimum wage, you're immediately displacing potential workers from the market. You're immediately making it so some people won't get jobs. And I guarantee you, the more that we push this minimum wage, $15, $20, whatever, the higher it goes, the higher the unemployment is going to go, and the poorer more people are going to get. So a lot of these jobs, and we've kind of talked about this before, but a lot of these jobs aren't necessarily designed to raise a family with, okay? So getting money in the world is ultimately, it's about providing value, okay? What value do you give other people or your employer for currency? Okay, in my case, I help people with their health. In your case, you're a computer wizard and you make sure that all the computers are humming along for a company that needs that done, right? So you're providing a value. I'm providing a value. Well, some things are more valuable than others. Now, we could go into some things not being right, okay? But let's just say all things are equal. So some things, getting a hamburger handed to you, made and handed to you from the McDonald's line, because I just like to use that as an example, is not as valuable of a service as what you provide, right? Your skill set is very technical. It took years of learning and more years of doing actively, okay? So that's the burger thing was never designed to be able to have kids on necessarily. It was designed because it is a low value skill. It is designed for somebody that needs a part-time job or a high school kid, and there's nothing wrong with that. We act like everybody should just like work and be able to do whatever they want right off the bat. But if you don't have skills that bring value in a market, then you're just not going to get paid very well. And ultimately, then you can work these low-paying jobs. You can build skills. You could become a manager of the restaurant or use those skills to go do something else or flip your own hamburgers that are superior or whatever it may be. And then you're going to bring more value through your experience to that company and get a higher wage for that value that you're now providing. But if the minimum wage then is $15, well, all of a sudden McDonald's says, you know what? Ultimately, we already have robots that can make the hamburgers. It's going to be cheaper in the long run to do that. We're just going to fire next to everybody. We'll have robots do it, and we're going to save a ton of money in the long run. So everybody at the McDonald's that was employed, even though they didn't make a lot, but they're finding ways to make it. Or if they're high school kids and whatever, it's fine. Now, none of them have jobs. Now they're just displaced, and now they can't even get business or work experience to get a higher paying job because the jobs aren't even there. And it won't be just flipping burgers. It'll be all kinds of industries. So that's definitely my long against it.
So I have, all right. So my opinion is if you work 40 hours a week, you should be able to afford to live, period. If you work a full-time job, you work so you can live. So we need to, and if we have to subsidize that with a UBI thing because we refuse to make these companies pay people enough to freaking live, then fine. $15 an hour is $30,000 a year. That's not a lot of money.
Right.
Period. It's just not, And then the reason I'm going to always call bullshit on that is because you have to see like, okay, well, where is the money going? We don't, once upon a time when America was great, the average CEO of the company or whatever might have made 10 to maybe 100 times more than his average worker. And those average workers were paid a salary that enabled them to raise a family and buy a house or whatever. We're getting to a point where people were there, the very, 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 very top are making billions of dollars and not adding billions of dollars of value to anything, while their workers are expected to just kind of deal with it. That is absolutely unacceptable, in my opinion. You know, so to say, and then also we also got to say, okay, well, what are other countries doing, right? Like, so we have like our McDonald's here. Well, in we talked about this before, like in Switzerland or Sweden or whatever, the average wage of McDonald's employees there is like $22.50 an hour, right? And no one's being automated, no one's being replaced with robots. They're just paid a wage that enables them to live, period. And that's what we need to do. When everyone's talking about, like, okay, well, just get a job where you're actually adding the value to society to justify your pay or whatever. Those jobs have all been freaking outsourced, or there's jobs.
Mm-hmm. And like in your heart, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. Like, I think everybody should be able to work like 40 hours a week and earn a living for the families too. I'm totally on board with that. But why do you think everything's outsourced? Because of the minimum wage, because of government regulation. You can't. So
but you're not seeing this in other countries. There can be, we can implement regulation to keep this outsourcing from happening. But also the minimum wage hasn't risen since 2009. What regulation has happened in the past 11 years or 12 years or whatever? 11 years? I don't know. Where am I? That is made this problem like just get balloon more and more. Like, there hasn't been any minimum wage implemented recently that would motivate these companies to just keep on doing what they've been doing. You know, we're gonna have to find, like, you're gonna have to identify what regulation is driving companies to outsource and also keeping this minimum wage like at a completely stagnant level. Like, a minimum wage exists for a reason, man. It's so people are paid enough to get the bare minimum. That's why it exists. Otherwise, if we never implemented a minimum wage, they would just pay us the less than that, as long as they can get away with it, until people like ultimately decide to like fucking start killing robber barons or whatever.
Well,
and then the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. You know,
right? Nothing's kept up with inflation. Like jobs.
CEO.
Well, yeah, but
you can't say nothing's kept up with inflation. People are making money. You know, there is money that can account for it.
Like, even like your pay has not kept up with inflation, right? And you're probably fairly well compensated, but
yeah,
technically it hasn't kept up with inflation either.
Yeah, but I've been fine. It's worse. Like, I think it's one.
I get that the heart of the minimum wage is exactly what you say. It's supposed to keep people up, but it just doesn't have that effect. It has the inverse relationship. So, for example, like both of us, okay, well, we hate these big giant global corporations. You know, like we're on board with that, right? Well, say you want to start. You can make a better hamburger. You can make the superior product of hamburger, but the minimum wage is not $20 an hour. So, I mean, McDonald's and all these players are already at hand. Well, suddenly you coming into that space and you make a superior product. You're bringing value to people. Your hamburger is twice as expensive as McDonald's, and people be glad to pay it. But you can't build your business because you can't afford, with your startup business, you can't afford to pay people $20 an hour. Therefore, your business goes down. It doesn't grow at all. And now we have less competition, and the global corporations just get bigger.
So I agree with that to an extent.
So the minimum wage failed. And
all right. So
more unemployment.
All right. So my example also is like, so we have people who are paying $7 an hour or whatever. It's not like they are barely getting by. like we can implement minimum wage in the sense that, okay, well, you have there's corporations that have like a certain revenue amount or like a certain amount of headcount or something, and they're the ones who are going to be on the hook, at least initially. That's how they rolled it out in Seattle. Not everyone has to pay $15 an hour. It's only if you I forget what the criteria is, but yeah, it makes sense. Like if you're starting like a mom and pop thing, you're not going to have the revenue to do that. If you're McDonald's, you have the revenue to do that. If you're Walmart, you have the revenue to do that. If you're Amazon, you have the revenue to do that. Hard stop. And they need to. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to hold them to that kind of standard. You know, if Jeff Bezos is making however many millions of dollars a second, he can pay how many people he employs $15 an hour, probably just from his paycheck, let alone everything else.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, definitely. But
yeah.
Ultimately,
so if we have to start a minimum wage, if we can say minimum wage needs to be raised for corporations making a certain revenue cap, is that something that you would entertain?
No.
And not as strong.
Ultimately, you would still feel the beast of Bezos and McDonald's and all these examples, because it still doesn't, like, so even if you said, okay, well, Jeff, you've got to pay everybody $20 an hour, but you as a startup company, you can pay your people 10, you can pay your people whatever, it doesn't matter, we don't care. Mm-hmm. Well, no one's going to work for you. Your company's still not going to go anywhere, because why would they work for you for 10 when they could work for Amazon for twice that? And it might suck, but it's twice the pay. People do stuff. So you still have less players in the game, and you still feed these monolithic companies because there are no options. You either buy from Walmart or you buy from Amazon, or you get.
Well, this is kind of getting besides the point, though. So if they work for Amazon and they're making enough to live, okay, good. Period. So if you can't pay people enough to live, and there's another company that can pay people enough to live, I don't see an argument. So yeah, one business might fail, but as long as these people who were not making enough to get by before are now being able to make enough to get by, I don't see the problem here.
So then you would be okay if, let's say, everybody on Earth worked for one of 4 global corporations, and they gave us a tiny pittance of what would then be trillions and trillions of dollars of each one of those companies' net worth, and that would be fine. And we can all just live and work and plan at Walmart, and that's okay.
If people are making enough to eat and be homed and not be struggling, I don't really care about what the means is. Like, obviously, I'm anti-super corporation, so I don't see that as like a realistic thing. But I don't see, it wouldn't be different from Walmart paying everyone to the government giving everyone UBI. You know, if everyone has enough to make it, okay, we solved society.
So you would be okay. So then you would be okay with, let's say, we cut your entire net worth to, let's say, like a 1/6 of what you have right now, maybe more, because now you work for global corporation Walmart, and you're never going to get a raise, and your life's never going to get better. You're never going to have more options because you work for global corporation Walmart, and they're the only place ever paying anything.
It entirely depends on.
So
it entirely depends on what the pay is.
So you're okay. Well, that's the thing, though. Like, if we get to that kind of a monopolistic system, they're going to pay you as little as possible. So all those guitars,
I know
you don't need those to live. You can't have those guitars. You can't have a car. You definitely can't have multiple houses. You're probably not going to have a house at all. You're going to live in a little box. So you see, like, capitalism.
Yeah. So see, you are taking things to a ridiculous conclusion. So now we have
level, because that's ultimately where these things will go unless they're curbed. And that's where the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Like, that's where all this will go.
Dude, but you can't say that. But the problem is we're already fucking there. You can't say like, oh, well, if corporations actually pay people enough to live, eventually the standard of living for everyone will just drop. We're already in a place where people are not making enough to live. Period. This is happening. We are already there. We are already in places where people are like living in little boxes and just barely fucking getting by because they're not being paid enough to do anything else. Certainly, everyone's complaining about the white genocide. White people aren't having kids because they're not getting paid enough to start a family. Period.
Right.
Full stop. You know? So it's so if companies were paying enough, because then we have to think about, okay, well, what is that? What is, I guess, an adequate standard of living, right? So if people are being paid enough, so like they're not living in a fucking shoebox and they can afford their car payment and they can afford their health insurance and can raise a family with and they can pursue happiness, then fine. I don't care how they get the funding, but you can't assume because people are being paid enough to survive that it's going to be like, okay, well, surviving is you have a box and power and that's it. Because maybe it will be if we just have like corporations are in charge of all of it, but I don't want the corporations to be in charge of it.
That's what I'm saying is human nature is such that power is always going to want to consolidate and it's always going to want to increase. And that's part of the beauty of our system and of capitalism in and of itself, if it's allowed to work, which
that's the end result of capitalism is one entity being allowed to grow to the point that nothing else can compete against it. That is the end result of capitalism. That's how we get Walmarts and Amazons.
And ironically, that's not the end result of capitalism. Ironically, that's the end result that we've seen time and time again of socialism and of capitalism.
You can't tell me that Amazon having all this power and Walmart having all this power and all this influence and Comcast and all these other monopolies, you cannot in good faith tell me that is a result of socialism. We're living in the most capitalistic freaking country in the world. We're seeing where capitalism is going. How are you going to tell me that's socialism?
Country in the world, we wouldn't have UBI. It wouldn't even be considered. If we lived in the most capitalistic place in the world, there wouldn't be welfare. There wouldn't be Social Security. These are all socialistic programs. We are very much a socialist country already.
Well, we have socialist. We absolutely have socialist programs to keep people from dying on the streets. But as far as like, I guess what it is I don't think you can really separate capitalism from corporatism at this point. Like if one entity is allowed to do everything only for the sake of profits, and they can eventually like buy up all their competitors and do like all these other little shiesty things with no regulation, you're going to end up with monopolies running the show, and controlling everything. And there is no government to try to fight against it. There's definitely no unions and we just have to deal with it. Like I'm saying, so Amazon is an example. So Amazon, they started with like Amazon is a security threat. Like we have like how much like government, like high top secret infrastructure is on AWS now. Well, what if Bezos is just like, oh, you're gonna raise my taxes? Well, I'm just gonna turn off all these government servers. That's a problem. So we have these problems with corporations run by capitalists have already gotten this undue power and influence over every aspect of our lives. This is what capitalism has done. You can't say that is socialism. We can say that there are socialist programs like welfare and Medicare or whatever, but these things this is what's keeping people from fucking dying on the streets. Capitalism is why Amazon is running basically freaking everything in the country. It's why people are getting a dependence on it to some extent. It's like, oh, everything's just going to deliver it to me. I don't have to go anywhere because Amazon got me. Right? Like this is a result of capitalism. What socialist program led to Amazon?
And this is where we always fundamentally disagree when we get to this conversation is it's not capitalism that's done this. It's government that's done this.
What government regulation contributed to Amazon being where they are now, as opposed to Amazon just making all the billions of dollars in the world, and now they can do what the fuck they want? What regulation benefited Amazon so much that they are going to become, I think they're already $1 trillion company. Like how much is Amazon?
Yeah, I think so. ultimately it's a whole series of regulations. It's just like what we talked about.
Tell me one. Tell me one. Give me one example.
We just talked about one for like 20 minutes. Minimum wage. We just talked about it for like 20 minutes.
So you think
makes it so that
you think,
and you said so yourself earlier. You said, okay, well, only these big companies can afford to pay that. Yeah.
But they're not paying people enough to live.
You consolidate everything into those few companies, and then we get us complaining about the giant companies that have all this power and control. Well, why do they have power and control? Because the government's regulated everything to the point to only benefit the big guys. If the government didn't regulate the big guys and the free market could actually work and actually could have competitors, and somebody makes a better product and Jeff Bezos can go screw himself because they did it better and faster, then things will actually work and things tend to balance themselves out with a real free market economy. But we haven't allowed the free market economy to actually work. It's all been
you're telling me that minimum wage, currently at $7.25 an hour, contributed to Amazon becoming the freaking global superpower that it is now. You're telling me that's one specific one. That
is one specific one. Now, does it matter so much like this moment because $7 is nothing now? Well, not so much.
$7. Well, when did Amazon?
That happening, 10 years ago or however long, has helped get us to this point.
Okay, so you think raising the minimum wage to $7.25 an hour in like 2009 benefited Amazon and Walmart and all these corporations to the extent that they can take over everything, and it wasn't because they just bought out everyone. Like Walmart took it.
That is one of the minimum wage is one of the many factors that consolidates power. Yes. Now, is it the only one? Well, no, but it's.
Okay. I'll have to look that up. I'll have to look that up. Powers.
We'll make like a specific. We'll come up with an order and we'll make a specific episode about capitalism and whatever. So
yeah, well, I think the minimum wage. I think. Huh?
I
think the minimum wage is a good. Huh?
Because I have to get off here, unfortunately, and go.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll say this one thing on the minimum wage then. I think what we need to so when minimum wage was raised to $7.25 an hour, how that benefited massive corporations, even though it's fucking next to nothing now. Because I think the competition could mostly afford people to pay people that. Walmart is just more efficient and bought everyone else out anyway. And then because minimum, we have the minimum wage has been raised to $15 an hour here in Seattle. And people are doing okay. It's not perfect, but nothing is. So I think we should really do a deep dive on what happened when the minimum wage was raised to $7.25 and see how that benefited apparently Amazon, Walmart, and fucking Comcast or wherever, and how where it is raised in certain areas, what was the impact. Because other countries have minimum wages that make sense, and these giant corporations are also there, but we're not seeing people talk about like they can't afford to live even though they're working like a full work week. Like in France, dude, they're riding in the streets and they have a 30-hour work week with fucking like nap breaks and shit. Right.
Yeah. We'll do an episode on that. It'll be fantastic, and we can continue to hash it all out. So, do you have any closing thoughts for our two audience members?
Well, really, I don't know. All feedback is appreciated. If there's anything you want us to talk about in the future, any ideas that we need to elaborate on, throw down. So obviously, this was just kind of like, hey, let's sit down and talk. In the future, and we have these ideas, we'll be a little bit more researched. So we won't just be trying to like think of ideas off the top of our head.
We can bring some stuff. Definitely.
Because like I said, primary sources, most important thing.
Definitely. All right, my man. Well, thank you for being here. This is Steve and Daniel. Discourse or Death.
Yep.